And you know, the skill is completely translated someday, even if you're not the ability to see all of them is something that's exactly what
Have you been able to like around where did the snow get in here? It was the mountain or
So odd. I want to kind of sit over here so I'm not like looking out. But I guess I'll do it after Michael finishes. So does he have to do anything but stand up here and talk? Okay.
While everybody's getting settled in, my name is Michael Upton, Community Outreach Manager, High Country News. We're a publication publication that covers kind of the intersection of people, places, communities, Western United States. If you're not familiar, there's a stack of magazines up there. Feel free to take one, take five. Become familiar with my work. They're totally free. So this side of this panel, some people we've been working with for a minute, and just thinking about news as an industry and kind of making decisions. These are conversations we have internally. Just thinking about like the relationship between content creators and news and kind of what this means for news as a service. So we thought it might be an interesting conversation about people to have with us. So obviously we're inviting everyone to ask questions afterwards. And with that, I'll hand it over to the chair.
Great, thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody, thanks for being here, especially on a snowy day. Oh my God, it's so fun to see alum from our program here. It's like, oh my God, hi, wow. And all our students and all communities. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Can you all hear me? I'll turn this on. Before we get going, I wanted to make sure that I read our land acknowledgement for the University of Washington. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Tonight, let me just tell you about myself. My name is Andrea Otáñez, and I am a teaching professor here in the Journalism and Public Interest Communications undergraduate major in the Department of Communication. I want to thank the chair of our department, Christine Harold, for her support in funding this event, as well as our crew in the department, including Tommy Ferguson and Jillian Cobb, and teaching professor Kaylee Cook, who helped with her with the logistics of this, and also the food and room setup crew that is here working on our behalf. I think I'm in this chair for two reasons. One, I'm a willing board member for High Country News, and I couldn't say no for this great idea when Michael brought it to me last October. We've been talking about this for a while, pre-election, mind you. So thank you, Michael, for sharing your idea with us, and to Greg Hanscom and Gary Love. Greg Hanscom is the executive director of High Country News, and Gary Love, Michael's boss, for making this public event a priority. The second reason I think I'm in this chair is for my deep commitments to educating new generations of journalists in this unprecedented time in the US, surreal, wacky time of attacks on the press, dropping trust in the press, truth being deracinated, ripped from its roots of original reporting because of AI chatbots, the social media companies deprioritizing news in their algorithms, and this is a big and, the huge proliferation of ways to hear from really interesting and informed people about what's going on in our world. I am a fierce defender of original reporting, and it's hard, critical work. I am also a huge fan of smart, passionate, well-informed people who help me make sense of that news, or who add depth or scope of other reporting. So how do they do their work? What is their relation to legacy media? And what do my students need to know to be a kick-ass presence online that people turn to when they want to find things out? So I hope that this conversation can help us all also be more informed consumers of information. So with that, I want to first read an introduction to each of our panelists, and then I'm going to play you their work, which is, I hope, how a lot of you were first introduced to them. So, far end, Birdie Sam began creating content during the pandemic to support their family, initially focusing on selling cloth masks. They have since engaged in climate activism against major fossil fuel projects while advocating for Indigenous justice, all while building a following of over 340,000 on TikTok with a message of radical hope. Kelsey Russell, in the middle, is a New York-based media literacy influencer and co-host of First Stop News. She reads the paper with her 100,000 print paper with her 100,000 plus followers, educating along the way on who owns the news outlets and why reading articles in print is much more fulfilling than hot takes on phones. She says, I read print media for better emotional regulation. Finally, Colorado-based Teal Lehto makes conservation news highly engaging and clear, no easy feat with complicated water issues. Through her TikTok account, she educates her over 60,000 followers on critical conservation issues, using her background in environmental studies and her love for rivers to inspire action on the West's pressing water challenges. So with that, let's play a video mashed together of their work so you can get a flavor of the work they do. And this video was put together by Marissa Garcia, so I want to thank her as well.
We did it.
That gives you a pretty good introduction of the kind of work these hardworking people do day in and day out. So we're going to just work our way into some questions, and I'm going to stop talking, and we'll all do some listening. So I briefly introduced you all. Can you each just tell us a little bit more about what brought you to this work, including your current focus? So whoever wants to start. I guess I'm looking at you, Birdie.
Okay. I have been voluntold. Well, what brought me to this work was not a bit like how we are here. I was voluntold. I didn't really join social media seeking to be an influencer in any capacity. It chose me, and I'm doing the best I can with what I have. And my current focus right now mostly involves repatriation for Indigenous folks to bring sacred objects home, either objects or remains ancestors. but also educating the public on the history of Indian boarding schools. My family has a very extensive history. Many of us attended. I am among the first in my generation to not attend boarding school. So understanding that very painful history is very much with us right now, and contextualizing that for the public to understand. So when the federal government releases their findings, because there's been a lot of research that's been going on federal and state levels, I'm able to prepare people for some very painful things. And that's where my main focus has been. Yeah.
Thank you.
I found myself in the work of influencing and content creating just by having first humorous lifestyle content. I was similar to a lot of Gen Z during the pandemic. I was on TikTok and had a video that accidentally went viral and just decided I'm going to share what's going on in college. I'm going to share the funny stuff. But then when I went to graduate school, there were two things going on at once. I found that I was studying sociology and education, and that's all I knew. When it came to news, politics, conflicts, I would be at dinner tables, parties, dates, and I didn't have anything to say, and I like to talk. So that didn't fit well with my soul. And also just going through therapy and dealing with anxiety, my therapist has suggested, why don't you find something that makes little Kelsey happy? And I thought about how I would sit in the library, I read almanacs, I read Guinness Book of World Records, and I would start my morning with a physical newspaper. And I said, oh, well, if I need to make little Kelsey happy and I also need to learn more about the world, and the only way I'm doing so right now is by scrolling on my phone and over-consuming and reading these drastic and terrible headlines, but not actually engaging, I should get a newspaper. And I already had a following of 40,000 followers. So I just decided, why don't I put my phone down, share what I'm learning, and the account has turned into why I've loved using print media as a vehicle for media literacy, why media literacy is so important, and also for younger people, why it's so important that we regulate our emotions when we're reading devastating and happy things occurring, and how hard that is to do when you get your news through social media. So that's how I started, was a little on accident and also on purpose too. And I just have to ask, I beg we can change the screen.
Oh, shoot. I am so
No, it's so fine. I just
I
can't
meant
stop
to.
looking at my big head.
There we go. Sorry.
No, you're so okay.
No, I'm so glad you said something. She's like, please.
I'm like sweating.
All right, we're good.
Okay, I started my platform out of spite. I graduated college in May of 2020, and so basically I went on spring break, and then they were like, never come back. And I was pretty bummed because I had a club on campus that was dedicated to water resource issues. During college, I actually formed a raft racing team. We represented the United States at the World Rafting Championships 3 years in a row, and so rafting has always been like a really big part of my life. And when I came back to campus, I started a club dedicated to water resource issues, and it was awesome because I was invited to all these meetings about like my watershed and the greater watershed that I was in, and people really seemed to like want to hear what I had to say. But the day that I got kicked off campus, I was no longer welcomed into any of those conversations. In the state of Colorado, we have a thing called the Colorado Water Plan, which is a plan for the next 50 years of our water supply, and each county has a basin table that people come together, and it's a volunteer thing, and I applied to be one of the people on that table so I could be involved in the decisions around water resources in my area. And I got a very funny Zoom call with my county commissioners where they were like, oh, sweetie, like you're so passionate. There has to be another way for you to be involved. And the day I got the rejection letter from that position is the day I posted my first TikTok video.
Here's how I'm involved.
Yeah. And they have since reached out to me with an extra seat on their board.
All right. Thank you. Well, let's do some basic definitions. Each of you, in any order you want. I don't want to tell anybody. So y'all choose. But are you an influencer, an activist, a content creator, a newsfluencer, an entertainer, a journalist, or something else altogether? And if possible, as you define yourself, can you help us make sense of these terms, if you think there's sense to be made of them?
I'm going to say newsfluencer sounds like something that came out of a think tank.
I think it was, actually.
Yeah. I don't particularly identify with the term influencer. particularly with the way that it's marketed right now, it mostly has to do with selling somebody something
Mhm.
physical. Hey, buy this vitamin, whatever. But with mine, I'm trying to influence the system. So a lot of my viewers are people who work in media, people who work for the federal government, people who are in decision-making positions. And I want to influence them to listen to people who maybe they wouldn't have if they hadn't just been told. And I didn't really come into this going, I'm going to be a journalist, because I am a college dropout. I'm going to be really honest. I didn't plan to be here, but I do really value and take it seriously that so many people who are in these positions that I look up to myself, they're also looking to me going, they want to know what I have to say on this. And I take that very seriously. But I also refuse to be the position of authority. I approach my platform as, I'm not the expert, I am learning, and these are my notes. And here are my sources. If I get something wrong, please tell me. And because of this, I have been able to patchwork together a college education of my own that I couldn't do because I couldn't afford it. But professors, PhD students, archaeologists, librarians, these are the people that make up my audience. And you enabled me to be here. So if you want to know, what am I? Well, I'm all of it, all at once. And whatever the position calls for at the time. Do I need to be a journalist? Do I need to be a campaign fundraiser? Do I need to be a tax person? Do I need to be an HR person? Depends on the day. So for me, it's just fill the need, whatever it happens to be.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely bristle at the concept of influencer. I prefer like the term creator because I'm creating content and I put a lot of time and effort into my content in the same way that somebody would into like a painting or a poem that they wrote. Like it's a creative process and there's like a specific technique that I have worked over time to be able to execute. And I think that that's like a big part of the distinction in my mind. I also think we've kind of started touching on this, but there's like different types of creators. And I definitely don't find myself in like the lifestyle influencer creator bucket. I would consider myself an activist, but not only for the things I post online. Like I'm actively showing up for activism in person as much as possible. I just attended like a 7-mile spirit walk on the White Mesa part of the Ute Mountain Reservation tribe because there's the last standing uranium mill in their area and it's right on one of the rivers that I care a lot about. So like I do consider myself an activist, but that's not just because of my platform. It's like my platform elevates the activism that I'm already doing. I never really considered myself a journalist until one day I got an invite by the Society for Environmental Journalists to go do a panel. And I was like, whoa, that's not me. And then they were like, it kind of is though. And I've always had an interest in journalism. Kind of funny, I was the social media editor for the school newspaper at the college that I went to. And I tried to write a couple of articles, but I really hated AP style. So I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So I started just doing columns and doing social media. And so I'd say I put myself squarely in the like creator activist space. And then I don't do any original reporting. So it doesn't feel fair to call myself a journalist because I'm reporting on things that people have already written.
Okay.
Yeah, similar. Definitely not a journalist. I use the term influencer. I think for me, it also comes from like a marketing standpoint of media literacy. Influencer honestly sounds good. Like it flows better than media literacy content creator, media literacy creator. So to me, when I came up with the term, I hadn't heard anybody doing it. And I also am influencing people to look at education differently, to use curiosity as a value when you're reading, to become media literate. So at first I used to shy away. I used to want to call myself a content creator until I did see I was making influence. So I said, this works for me. But I think the term is just how people, I mean, I see it as how people define themselves, because I feel like when I do think of influencers though, however, my brain does go to more lifestyle. The get ready was with me. There's somebody who's selling you a product, but I can't lie, mine, I just say influencer because it sounds good, but I'm also making influence too.
Yeah. Well, put together with media literacy influencer, right? It's kind of a, oh.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let's see. What is the goal of your work? To put it another way, what does success look like for each of you with this work?
I'd say the overall goal for me, anyways, is very unique to my niche, is to amplify Indigenous voices. It doesn't work if it's just people only listen to me. People need to listen to lived experience, which was it's I can't be the only voice that gets lifted. So my goal is to make sure that there are multiple communities that benefit. It's not just for me. Like, in terms of, like, I used to have a clear goal, like bully oil executives with a lot of my climate content. That was kind of the main rule. Like, if you're going to bully people on the internet, bully the rich. So that was what I did for a very long time. But it gets a little bit more nuanced when my identity comes into play, because I am Tlingit from Southeast Alaska. Like, what I talk about affects the lives of real people, and numbers in your algorithm represent breathing people who have entire lives on the other side of that screen. And understanding that has been probably the biggest lesson that I've had. So what is my goal? It's to humanize the people on the other side of the screen.
I would say my goal is to make people excited about learning and center curiosity in that learning. And I think right now, print media is the vehicle that I use to do that. I could see the rest of my life, it could be a different vehicle. But the other goal of my work, because I read print media, is to create a bridge for journalists to not see content creators and influencers as competition, but rather people who can work together as partners. Because we have to. Like, somebody has to, well, let me back up too. We both have two different sets of skills, right? Something that content creators and influencers can do is they can garner an audience. They can make you stop in your tracks and say, oh, I'm going to watch this video, or I'm not going to watch this video. Versus a journalist doesn't always, they have some words to do so. And so I think if we can work together, we can actually get people informed with our different skills. So I would say, make people excited about learning, because I'm a nerd. Like, I think learning is so fun. But then the other part is, like, journalists, influencers, content creators, we're different. We have different skills, but we have got to work together for, you know, us to be successful as a society, whatever. Well, people in this room probably have the right version of success. But yeah, be successful. Yeah.
Thank you.
I definitely didn't start my platform with any kind of specific goal. It was more just I wanted a space to talk about the climate anxiety I was experiencing as I was watching the Colorado River Basin careening towards a disaster that we narrowly missed just because we got a lot of snow. And so it's kind of hard for me to explain my goals without getting into like a little bit of policy wonk stuff in the Colorado River Basin. But basically the way we've been managing the Colorado River for the last 100 years completely ignores the environmental reality of the region. And we're like continually steering ourselves towards like a train wreck. And when you go to these conferences and you're in these rooms where all the decision makers are, there's like things that they just won't say out loud. They just won't acknowledge how much water is going to alfalfa. They won't acknowledge how much water we're losing to climate change. They won't acknowledge how close our infrastructure is. Like, Lake Powell is not scheduled to be standing for another 75 years. Like, it structurally is not sound enough to survive for another lifetime. And like, we're not having these conversations. And so I try to use my platform to kind of be like a thorn in the side of all of these decision makers. So like, they can't avoid the conversation because I'm making it happen online. And I know a lot of water managers throughout the basin follow me because like I could see, I'm a nerd and I do go through my followers list, and like I can see a lot of these decision makers are following me, and a lot of them actually do share similar opinions to me, but they can't say them out loud or they lose their position in negotiating. But just by having that information out there, it's like shifting the Overton window of like what's the acceptable conversation to have. But then like zooming out, I also think when I first started doing what I was doing, there really wasn't a lot of like environmental issue specific influencers that weren't just like how to live sustainably or like vegan lifestyle. There weren't a lot of people who were like, this is an environmental issue I care a lot about, I'm going to educate you about it. And I've noticed that the environmental world in general is really behind the times when it comes to social media. They're like really failing to reach the audiences that they need to reach. And so like the other goal of my platform is to like prove to people that like people care and people are listening, and this is a viable way to organize and to generate grassroots support for environmental issues.
So I'm hearing you say success to you is maybe policy change in the long run, but at a bare minimum, it's like changing the conversation, right? And you can see that, you can document that. Sorry.
I was just going to add, I mean, I know that's already happening because like there are reporters that have my phone number on speed dial. So when they do their interviews with all of the negotiators in the Colorado River Basin, they call me afterwards and they say, can you say the things that they wanted to say, but they're not allowed to. And like, and I end up being like the last quote in a lot of articles about the Colorado River Basin because I'm like allowed to say the quiet part out loud.
I see. And so then back to you, Kelsey, success, what does it look like with your work? What is that?
It looks like somebody saying that they picked up a paper because they saw my TikTok, or they felt confident enough to share something they learned at a dinner table. I also think experiences like this are way more successful than any engagement metric can ever be. Like saves, likes, comments. Well, I have to give it. Saves are my favorite type of success on a social media platform, because that lets you know somebody saved it and they want to come back. I don't know when you all do your late night TikTok scroll. It's usually late night or morning for me. So that is a little version of internet success. Yeah. But I will say it's when I hear that people are saying they want to learn more. They want to become educated about a topic that might scare them. So that's what success looks like to me, is seeing the people around me or people that are a part of my virtual community saying they're excited to learn again.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Birdie, did you want to add more to what success looks like for you?
I think my favorite interactions online come from two groups. One is my native audience who are learning more about Indian boarding schools and reconnecting with their culture because of some of the content that I've put out. The other one is actually a group of oil workers who follow me, and from a series of posts where I was talking about specifically Enbridge, but the nature of how a lot of these oil companies move to manufacture consent in their communities. And early on, one of my largest videos was when I was talking to oil workers because they were trolling my page. And I was like, well, if you're here, I'll talk to you. And I was like, did you know your skills are very transferable to green energy spaces? And those videos took off. Like, I had not seen 300,000 plus views on my videos up until that point, but that was really resonated with people. And my favorite is hearing from those families that they got out, that they are now successfully in other industries. And I have heard it multiple times in the last few years, and it's my favorite. So, thank you.
You've all sort of touched on your relationship with legacy media, and you were particularly clear, Kelsey, on this point that y'all need each other, right? And we all need you to need each other, right? So what the title of this panel is, the future of news. So can y'all talk about that a little bit more? Do you see yourself as part of the future of news? And if so, how so? What does that look like?
I have had a standing relationship with Popular Information, which is an independent newsletter. And they do the writing, I make the videos. And what I have tried to focus on is making they're independent, but they are legacy media in the sense that they write, and then that's how they, I make it as, I try to remove the barrier to entry when it comes to understanding the content. The way Judd Legum writes is very legal, and he's a lawyer, that makes sense. So I have to take these concepts and remove that barrier to entry on knowledge, if that makes sense. So not everyone's going to read through a full article that was written by a lawyer, but a 1.5-minute video where I break it down with a cute smile on my face, it makes it more personal.
Yeah.
Where I hand deliver it to you,
Yeah.
and now I'm in the palm of your hand, and I get to say it using my sweet voice, and it removes a lot of these barriers to entries, especially when you're talking about literal fascism, which is scary enough as it is. I take a lot of the sharpness out of it, and when it comes to consuming the information, but you still get it. I am not a journalist. I did not go to journalism school. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't write it, but I do deliver it. So I'm on my own taking crash courses in lobbying tactics and all the different Russian doll style packs of how the money moves through. So I at least sound like I know what I'm talking about in front of the camera. But we genuinely do need each other. Like, I would not sound the way that I do if it wasn't for Judd's writing. And I would not have that trust that people have, because I don't have that credentials behind me, but he does.
So are those part of your TikTok, or they're on their channels?
I have built up their own TikTok channel.
Okay.
So they have their own Popular Information TikTok channel that I built using my videos.
I see.
Based on their newsletters. So that is its own there's a whole part of the internet that knows me for Popular Information that has no idea about anything else. So it's its own monster, but it's recently Popular Information's reporting was cited in a lawsuit that is going against the Trump administration right now over the current data issues with Elon Musk. So it's, that reporting is very, I take it very seriously, and it's a working relationship that we've had for over 2 years now. So yeah.
It's interesting to, and any of you, please feel free to answer this as well. If those social media TikTok videos are the end result, are they an on-ramp to the longer piece, or are they their own thing?
They can be their own standalone thing. I try to make it so that all of the information is in the video, but the links to the sources, that's all going to be in the reporting. So I direct people over the reporting, but I do try to get all the information in there. So
got it.
If people only ever do see the video, at least they got all the info.
Okay.
Kelsey probably has like some really deep thoughts on this, so I want to leave a lot of time for you. But yes. I will say that my relationship with legacy media has shifted a lot over the years. Like, I have a rolling contract with High Country News. That's why I'm here. I love working with High Country News. You guys do some of the best water reporting in the West. But I'm also constantly on the prowl for like any good articles about water reporting. And I've been on panels with other reporters where like reporters have asked in the panel, like, why is she here? Like, she doesn't belong to be here with the rest of us. I have been told by reporters who have used their articles where I put the publisher, the date of publishing, their name, and the title and everything in my video, and they're still claiming that like I am plagiarizing them and not citing them correctly because it's not an AMA or APA style source. And like I've tried to look into this. This has not been caught up yet. There is no official way to cite a source in a reel or a TikTok. But that same journalist who did that to me, I was like, well, I can tag you in my videos if that's what you want. And now like she sends me her articles and like wants me to share them. So this is like it's like a rapidly changing dynamic where like I think at first they felt a little bit like, oh, are you coming to take my job? And I think now they're coming to understand that like the media landscape is changing whether they like it or not. And it's like adapt or die.
Somebody said that in my class today, adapt or die. So please go ahead.
I like that. I mean, I feel with like legacy media, I'm not a fan of full entire rejection of legacy media. I'm not a full fan of rejection of absolutely anything. I think that is, I mean, that's just not the way my brain works, right? I think that ultimately legacy institutions do have some things that affect the way that they are bringing stories, aka money. Like that's one of the biggest things. And I feel like a lot of independent sources, what they give you is the raw information that you want. And I think what a lot of I've noticed, and we were talking about this with biases in news, is that I think the future of news has to address how, as a journalist, you cannot be unbiased. There is absolutely no way. And I mean, I study sociology, and if you've ever done, I mean, this isn't a thing in sociology, it's in a lot of social sciences, reflexivity. If you're ever going to do a study, you have to talk about how your own identity affects the participants, affects what you're studying, affects the outcomes that you might have gotten. You have to think critically. And I think journalism has done a disservice to journalists by not allowing them to give parts of their voice. And I think that that's why you might find excommunicated journalists having their own podcast or having their own YouTube channel. So I think that the future of news has to look like we have to address biases. We have to address the fact that, yeah, your newspaper does lean left, it does lean right, but also if it does lean a certain way, how can you maybe encourage your readership to read something else that might not agree with you? How can you have journalism that encourages conversation amongst people? Does that mean at the end of an article, like, you know, when you're reading a book and they have questions for book club at the end, does that mean that we give a little bit of context towards, if we're talking about this conflict going on in a country, how did we get here? What were the 5 key things that happened? And I think that goes back to my point in media literacy. And I was talking, hey, Brooke is here. She interviewed me before. And I was talking about media literacy, that, I mean, our public education system is not failing. It has failed. Like it's failed. And we have people who cannot read and are not media literate. So it's going to be up to journalists to make their work accessible. And a lot of times that's not just simply in the words you say. We're going to have to give context. We're going to have to teach people how to discuss things. So that's what I hope the future of news looks like, is not who, what, where, what, when, and why happened. I mean, we got to go back to like, get people excited. That's what you do when you first start learning. We got to go back to 6th grade when you have some prompts before you read something. You have some questions at the end. So legacy media, I'm not fully there to reject it, but I think the older institutions have the means to change in ways that they can really influence a society. So, and I did get the New York Times first. That was the first thing I read. And a lot of my followers did not, they did not like that. And as somebody who was new to the print world, they have taught me a lot about issues with certain legacy media and longer institutions that I thank them very much for, because I wouldn't have known as just a blind reader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an example?
Oh, yeah. I mean, gosh, like I feel like a lot of my followers have helped me understand who might be sitting on the board of an institution,
Okay.
who might be an executive there, and what are some of their views, and making me critically think like, okay, if the people leading this institution are all family members and they all might be a part of a certain religion, how is that going to affect what they're reporting, what they're not reporting? So I would absolutely say that's like a roundabout example. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks for pulling that out. I'm going to switch a little bit because you guys have answered a lot of my questions around journalism very well already. So Let's get into the work and how-tos. Obviously, you're talking about your work, but how-tos. And some of these questions come from my students. Let's see. With concerns of misinformation spreading, how do you fact-check your content before sharing it to your audience?
So on the videos that I'm working with High Country News, I actually write a script, and that script is then reviewed by the person who wrote that article, and they're able to like leave comments like, actually, this wasn't really the angle that I wanted to portray here, or your acreage is wrong, or whatever. But typically, they're pretty on board with whatever kind of jokes I want to make. Like they're very open to like my creative style as long as it's accurate. And then I think a big thing is just being open to taking feedback from people. And like I've had conversations with people from user groups on the Colorado River Basin, like alfalfa farmers, where I've had email exchanges with them where like, maybe we don't always see eye to eye, but I'm willing to accept their information and understand new things. And I will always, always, always post a video saying, hey, what I said in that last video is wrong. Let me recorrect this. I'm not perfect. Nobody can be perfect, but the important part is just like being willing and receptive to feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, part of my process because what I'm doing is I'm reading an article and then I'm sharing what I've learned. So a part of my audience, if I don't know a word, if I don't know something, I'm going to go and look up the process and tell them where I found that information.
Mm-hmm.
So that is pretty much my process of letting my audience know I'm working to learn. And also I have had comments that said that was completely incorrect what you said. And then I oftentimes will make a reply video after doing more research and letting them know, like you said, yeah, I was absolutely wrong. So that's part of the process.
I mean, it's a very similar process. A lot of my work is reporting on things that journalists have already written when it comes to, especially with popular information. I don't write that. That's all I script from the newsletter. But when I'm talking about other things on my personal platform, I do try to pull mostly from existing news sources that I know that I can trust.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes when I'm working on videos on Indian boarding schools, I'm going into journals and going into papers that were published back in the 80s and then were uploaded and scanned documents. So it's just keeping track of everything that I've found on the internet, and I have my own little place where I plug all of my sources, and I make it publicly available for all of my followers to go and see. So if they do have questions for themselves, I'm like, okay, this is where I found it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I get something wrong, obviously, I be open to feedback, be open to that criticism, because more often than not, they're just trying to help.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sounds like journalism to me.
Yeah, and then like I said earlier, I always try to cite my sources in my video.
Yeah.
So like whatever article or whatever it is I'm getting my info from, like I'm gonna include the author, the name of the paper, the publisher, the time it was published, just like you would in any other kind of citation.
Yeah.
Again, I've looked this up, but it actually has not been decided yet how to do so in short form video.
Here's another question that came up with my students today, and that how do you make your income from your social media work?
primarily contracts and a little bit of merch.
A little bit of
Buy
merch.
my t-shirts.
I would say, honestly, primarily public speaking, and then also like long-term contracts with people. So how can you use your voice to like amplify something else? But if any future content creators, before you start, I would suggest that you make a pie chart of where you want your income to come from. And I would realize that brand partnerships are probably going to be the ones that waver the most. But I would say if I could go back to not being a content creator, I would have said, okay, if this was the path I was going to take, if I was going to go down the traditional path of what I wanted to do versus be a content creator, how could I make as much, and how much would I want to make for brand partnerships? How much would I want to make from public speaking, from merch? So yeah, but brand partnerships, but mostly public speaking for me. And I choose to do that because you have your ups and downs as a content creator. I mean, you're an entrepreneur. So some months it's great. Like life is good.
Yeah.
And some months you're in the house. Like life is okay. So that's what I would say for future ones. Yeah.
Yeah, plus there's not a lot of overhead. So when tax time comes around, there's like not that many things that you get to write off because it's just like you and your phone versus the world.
Yeah.
I would add, I make most of my money off of contracts. I would never rely unless you're using YouTube on monetization for money. It's just not a really reliable way, and you can get kicked out of that really easily if you just say something wrong. So I personally don't do brand deals. I don't ask my followers to do anything I wouldn't. So the kinds of contracts that I do are usually like a campaign where I'm asking for people to sign petitions, or perhaps I'm asking them to make a donation to a specific legal fund. Most of the time though, my contracts are with like organizations that just want to get info out. And so they're just asking me like to talk about something that's related to my niche in like the water world. But my full-time job is actually in social media consulting for environmental firms. And I connect environmental firms with other content creators so that they can get contracts.
Do you do that in the news space as well? Do you?
I haven't so far in the news space. I've been working like solely in like the public lands conservation world.
Is that a going concern? Are there content creators who are like freelancing like you are for High Country News? Can you all see yourself doing that? Like, and maybe you already do, forgive me, I haven't watched every single video you prolific people have made. But talk about that connection, how you do get connected with the news outlet. Because as you said, adapt or die, right? And there's a generational gap out there, I think, from people, not all over the place in all news outlets, but there's a generational gap for how news has been done forever, and the very real ongoing reality of how people consume it, especially, the much coveted younger audiences. I'm not going to go over all those cliches. How does that happen? How do we connect content creators like yourself or news outlets open up the door to doing more of that with the people who are in the newsroom? And obviously it does happen. There are TikTok accounts out there from major news outlets, but what does that freelance relationship look like, and how do you make it happen?
Well, I mean, I think in the beginning for anybody, there's going to be a grind period, you don't get to cold call people for contracts. Contracts come to you. And so you just always have to be checking your DMs, make sure you have an email in your bio that people can reach out to. My work with High Country News literally just started by like Michael sending me a DM, and then we were like, hey, you want to do some videos? And we've been doing that for like, 2 years now, which is great. And then, I think in general, it's like you have to build your brand and your platform to a point that like it is desirable for somebody to work with you. And I think in the meantime, it's worth it to like start making connections with other publications by like if there's for example, like I use a lot of articles from the Colorado Sun. Would be sick if the Colorado Sun hit me up with a contract. Like maybe I'll be one of their first creators on that list when they decide to finally do that. But it's like the organizations themselves need to be the ones who get the ball rolling and like decide that this is like a valid thing to invest in, because you don't like reach out to them for contracts. They reach out to you.
I had the same experience when Judd's team reached out to me 2 years ago. They're just like, hey, we're on the same page. Would you like to make videos? And now here I am. Same thing with High Country News. Just woke up to an email and they're like, hi, want to make some videos? So it's just one of those things where they just show up and you keep plugging away and hoping for the best.
And I think you can like try to monetize faster by doing like Amazon affiliate links and stuff like that. But like once you wade into that territory, you're losing a lot of your credibility. So.
I don't have much to add.
Okay.
You guys pretty much said exactly what happens. I guess the only thing I would have to add is as things start to come your way, be prepared for what you want to come next bigger, right? Like, so if people are coming to you consistently saying, hey, we'd love for you to make a video of information, I would consider already thinking about, okay, when the next bigger company comes to me, because if somebody comes to you with something, that means somebody else is going to come. And if you can offer them something even bigger and better than what you did for somebody else, you're giving yourself a leg up. So that's what I would say is always be thinking outside the box of what people are asking you for. But yeah, it kind of just happens in this world is, I guess, how the influencer game works, or content creation, whichever one.
Yeah, and also like when you first start, when you get your first couple of like, hey, you want to work with us emails, they're going to be like, we're going to give you 3 pennies. You're going to be like, no. And like, it's very important, even if you have a smaller following, that you don't just like go with the very first person who reaches out with a contract to you. Like, make sure it aligns with your values and the niche that you're within. That's another thing, is like, I get a lot of offers where they're like, let's talk about this issue, and it's just totally out of my niche, and I know that I will bleed followers if I do that. And so, like, you do have to be really aware of, like, why are people following you in particular, and how does that intersect with what this company wants from you?
Yeah. And to add to that, you just made me think of something, because they do offer you 3 pennies, maybe 4 the first time. Always try to get invaluable experiences, especially from people who might not want to pay you the way you want to. So somebody says to you, like, you got to negotiate. If somebody says, oh, we won't be able to pay you, I'd love to come take a tour of your office and maybe learn more before I say yes. I would love to maybe attend one of your events and learn more about your team, because ultimately the connections you make anywhere in life are going to be more valuable than the money you're going to make. Money will come, it will go, but the connections can last a lifetime, if not more, for generations. So I always will make sure, if you're an influencer, to ask for those invaluable experiences outside of the money as well. So, yeah.
Super smart. I have one more question, then let's see what the audience has to ask. And that is, I noticed from some of your posts that you obviously weather some blowback, right? Sometimes personal, at least very mean. How do you manage that?
Shutting the phone off.
Uh-huh.
Shutting the phone off, giving it an hour, walking away, taking a breath, remembering that a lot of these people, it's not personal. Yes, like, you want to be open to feedback. You want to be, you don't want to be one of those people that just completely ignores your audience whenever they have an issue with you. But being able to recognize when somebody has genuine feedback, and then being able to differentiate that between someone who is using your comment section as more of a journal entry. There are people who just want to use you as an emotional punching bag, and you have to be very good at discerning when that difference is. So for me, I generally assume that the angrier they are right off the bat, the more likely they are to be a troll. But I have done away with the assumptions that everyone's a bot. I try to avoid that at all costs, because when I fell into that mentality, suddenly everyone was bots. And that was very uncomfortable, because it ultimately dehumanizes everyone. So just, even if I'm wrong and they are a bot, I'd rather assume they're a human, because it makes me a better person and when I'm interacting with everyone else. So a lot of it is, don't take it personally. Most of these people have no idea who you are, and they don't want to know who you are. They just want the opportunity to be mean to someone without consequences. But 99% of the time, that's usually what's happening. But, there's always be open to that moment of, oh, did I actually get something wrong? So it's a balance.
I feel that, like, any platform, whether or not it's a creator, it's an organization, whatever, if you have a large platform and you're posting content, then, like, your comment section is also your garden to tend. And, like, you can create a space where misinformation is being spread on your platform without you even intending to do so. And so a lot of times when I am responding to people in my comment section, even if they are being mean, it's not a conversation with them. It's a conversation with, like, the 3,000 other people that are going to open the comments and come to some kind of conclusion about the content that they're looking at based on the sentiments in the comments. And so, like, I do think that there's, like, a need for people to at least combat misinformation in their comments by being like, hey, that's not true. And if you're not able to, like, mentally at that, like, sometimes I have the mental capacity to have that conversation, knowing that I'm never going to convince that person, but other people will read that and be like, wow, that guy sounded like an a-hole, and she knew what she was talking about. If I don't have the mental capacity for that, then I do feel the need to moderate my comments by deleting misinformation. Like, I think that's a really critical part. If you're running an informational platform, you either need to push back on misinformation or you need to delete it.
I feel like I'm kind of thinking of the different forms of negativity I get, because I think feedback is one thing, and I think most people who know how to communicate feedback, they communicate it well, and they're usually your followers too. Like they want to see things improve. They didn't, maybe something you said didn't erupt them the wrong way, and that's when you can have a productive conversation. But ultimately, negative conversations that can lead to productivity, to me, are damn near impossible online, because you have to have human connection to have difficult conversations. I need to see how your body is reacting. You need to see that I'm hurt. We need to be able to understand those things. So when it comes to actual misinformation, that's a delete, or I'm like, girl, that you make no sense. Like that's something I tell, I'm like, you're not making any sense. Or somebody says something nasty, I'm like, that was rude. I just tell them what it is. Or I'll be like, you're nasty, you're rude. And especially if it's towards me as a person and they're commenting on things like my appearance or my background, that's when I just kind of maybe troll them back and sassy. And that might be just me wanting to get my little lick into if somebody says something. But if it's misinformation, it's either girl, that makes no sense, or delete. And then a lot of people, they're not heard. And like you said, the comment section is an opportunity for them to be heard. So.
Also, don't be afraid of that block button. Probably got like 3,000 people blocked on my account.
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna come in here and be like, your voice is shrill and you're ugly, I don't care. You're getting blocked.
Yeah.
Let me help you with that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Like, oh, you didn't like hearing me? You never will again.
All right, well, let's see what y'all have to say. There's a microphone up here. I'm also happy to walk around with the microphone, but we'd love to hear your questions for our brilliant panel. Matea, you just want to stand up and maybe we can hear you.
Hi, my name is Matea, and I'm in Andrea's community news class this quarter. We've been talking a lot about objectivity, and Kelsey, you touched on this a little bit, but there's kind of a tension right now between traditional ideals of objectivity and then a new understanding of objectivity that more advances and like gives voice to who haven't traditionally had voice, because traditional ideals of objectivity have kind of enforced the status quo. So my question for you guys is, how do you kind of balance sharing parts of yourself on your platforms to make connections with your audience while still establishing yourself as a factual source of information?
I make it really clear to all of my followers what my bias is, because I started my account with like an activist intent. And this is actually something like I was talking earlier about being on a panel where somebody was like, why are you on this panel?
That was nasty.
It was mean.
Nasty,
It was
yeah.
really mean. But that was the next hit that she came at me with was like, oh, so you actually like care about what's happening here, as if it was like an insult to me. And I was like, yeah, girl, like this is my future. If there's no water here, then like I can't live here. Like you should also care. And like I guess I don't really have answers for you, but I can say that like I personally don't believe in trying to like remove my bias from what I'm talking about. I would rather my followers know like I am a girl who believes in like the value of the environment and the need for change in our basin, and I see a better and more sustainable future, and I'm using my platform to fight for that. And I'm teaching people along the way, but at no point in time am I going to pretend like that's not the angle I'm coming from.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of parts of myself, I think there's the bias part. Like even today I made a video about the New York Magazine. One of their reporters went to spend like 2 nights with a lot of MAGA supporters, like young Trump supporters, and their views. And I was very clear in my video, like I lean to the left. I do not agree with these things. However, these are sparking senses of curiosity. Like some of the things that these people are saying are intriguing, and that's okay to be intrigued by what other people on the other side of the political spectrum are saying. We should be. That's how you have conversation. But I think there's the other part of Kelsey, of like me sharing parts of myself, and I purposely keep parts of those away from my audience because I have to protect my own mental health. Like, right? I mean, the version of Kelsey that my sisters know, that my friends know, I can't give that all on the internet, or else it would probably destroy me, because people, the more you show of yourself, unfortunately, people can be very mean. So I think also as a content creator, influencer, whatever you want to call yourself, you have to still keep some bits of you inside and in the private sphere. But I do think for my platform, similarly, like I'm going to talk about things that I need to say I do not agree on. And I want to make that clear. So those are kind of how I balance the two.
I'm still figuring it out, if I'm
Good
being
answer.
real honest. I don't always get it right. Sometimes I overshare, and sometimes I realize I haven't shared anything. And I've come to that realization recently, like I have become so about the issues that I talk about that a lot of the people that follow me now have no idea that I have kids. They have no idea that I'm married. They have no idea that I identify as non-binary because I just stopped talking about these things. And it's something that I'm trying to reintroduce into my content again to show why I care about these things, why it matters to me, how this is impacting me directly. But it's a constant learning process, and sometimes I have to relearn things over again. And how to be myself in front of the camera, it's been 4 years now, and I'm still figuring it out.
You just reminded me of something, this influencer I used to follow. She was like a full lifestyle influencer, but almost every 6 months she would reintroduce herself to her audience and say like, hi, you know, my name is this, I live here. And it was basic things like, I have this many siblings, I'm from this place, I like this. And I want to, when you said that, I was like, I kind of want to incorporate that into my content, is reintroducing myself every time. So I can kind of pick and choose what I want to share in each part of life, so.
But I totally get where you're coming from with your question. And like, that's part of the reason why I stopped writing for the school newspaper that I was at. Is I was like, look, I can't keep this out. I am who I am, and I'm going to write through my voice. You know, and that might just mean like some publications aren't going to be the right space for you.
That part.
Thank you. Please.
I'm interested in what you said, Birdie, about if a source is sharing more about who they are, it maybe makes the audience understand their advocacy better. And I'm curious whether, having just said that, is that what's missing from what you all call legacy media? Somehow, in the process of getting educated as journalists, whatever that means, we kind of stripped away all the things that would allow our audience to understand us better or relate to us.
Relatability is one of the biggest currencies on the internet, and how relatable an audience finds a media person. And, you know, we talk about it a lot. Like, there's a reason why certain influencers get millions of followers. It's because millions of people see something of themselves in that content creator, be it something in themselves or something in their life that resonates. And I do think that legacy media needs to kind of maybe go on a little bit of a soul search and remember who they are and why they started doing this work, because there's a lot of journalists that I have met in this work. I work for a lawyer, his name is Judd Legum, and he has a cadence that is very common amongst lawyers and isn't necessarily what I would call I have this thing what I call a 5-star customer service voice. He does not have that.
2 stars?
5-star customer service voice. And it's something that many legacy media folks purposely train themselves out of. And that's part of that, losing the bias. And you lose your voice when you do that. And we want to know who you are. And I think that's something that a lot of journalists, you know, we want to know your voice as a reader.
Yeah, I think a lot of journalists are well aware that like humans are storytellers, but they take themselves out of the story. And I think like that's part of the story.
Yeah.
I do too. I also think another thing about journalism is it's almost hidden. Like if you're not a journalist, the way you are supposed to do it is unknown to the public. So I also think in the soul searching made me think of, you know, like even in medicine, right? A lot of medical schools have now started to have classes about like how to humanize yourself, because that is a really hard job, especially if you're a doctor that has to see a lot of death, right? Like how do you look at a patient and say like, you are a person and I'm a person too? And I feel like with journalism, like I want to know, like I feel like I always say journalism has to be sexy. Like we need to know what part of it in your schooling did you learn to take yourself out of the story? I mean, why do you do that? Maybe some journalists enjoy doing it. Like some might just enjoy having their stories in private and telling other public stories. But I think by even sharing the training of a journalist and why that is, because there's a reason, right? Like there's a reason in that training that you're taught to take yourself out. So even telling the public why that is might give them some insight of, oh, okay, that makes sense that we didn't hear that person's voice, or that makes sense that we did hear it this time.
I think it's sociologist Gail Tuchman talks about the defensive rituals of journalism. And journalism is a difficult profession. And so there are these sort of barriers that, not all great, and that voice of neutrality, third person being, that rhetorical tool of neutrality. So lots of really interesting work out there why that happens. Not in defense of the removal of voice, but when you think about the different spectrum, I think you mentioned, Teal, that news outlet may not want that, right? That's just not how they do their thing or on that particular story. But there's a spectrum of options, right? And you might be a leader in your newsroom where you're like, let's try this, or yeah, I really want to leave that phrase there because it signals something important. So I do think those conversations happen, but figuring out this relatability, especially in the social media space, I think is really key. That's just me, though. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hey, I'm Alicia. Thank you all so much, you all are beautiful storytellers. And just real quick, I would be like, let's shout out Ivy Wells real quick about their perspective on objectivity. But print is Kelsey. Love how you cover print. And I'm really trying to decenter my phone right now.
Yes.
But like, what are some of your suggestions or maybe some ideas that you have for creating or supporting local print? Because like an example I'm seeing right now is people posting "Know Your Rights" signs in my neighborhood, right? And other things like that. That I don't have a printer in my own house, but I'm curious some of the ideas you may have for getting really critical, like safety information out and kind of off of the digital spots.
That's so real. I like that question a lot. Okay, so there's two things that always come to mind. My supporters in our community always say the biggest access to print is paying, like the paywall that you have to pay to get something delivered to your door every day. And my answer to them is always, that's true. Like it's really expensive to have something delivered. And I don't want us to forget about our public libraries that like literally still get the newspaper every single day. I mean, my aunt, she's a middle school teacher in Florida. And I also realized newspapers could be such a great way to get around book bans, but that's here nor there. But she went to her library because she shows her students my content. They get the Tampa Bay Times every single day and don't do anything with it. So I also always encourage people to ask if you're in any type of school, are we getting the paper? They possibly still are. So that's the first thing is public libraries. And also if you have any type of educational space, community centers. And I would say that, as much as it's up to people and us as a people, I wish these legacy institutions could realize you all have a duty to make your resources free to people. You have a duty to go into elementary schools, public schools, and offer them subscriptions, to have your journalists go into classes and speak to them. But I would say, I honestly would like to put our heads together to think about if people don't have printers, how can they get the information out there in print, and why that's more important. So I don't have a direct answer for that one, but I do want to put my thinking cap on, and if anybody has one, I would like to know.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering, how do you balance your emotion and when it comes to putting your emotions in towards your content and making sure people know about how to all these topics, while also making sure your personal life you take care of yourself and the people around you?
I mean, I think that's something I'm still working on. Yeah, like, I mean, since inauguration, it's been really hard for me to want to make content. I'm sure that a lot of people in this room have been feeling just a little stagnated, and my platform is like so wholly dedicated to environmental and water issues, and they seem so minuscule compared to like a lot of the things that are happening right now. But I just posted a video yesterday specifically talking about this feeling with my followers. And I think that's like the cool thing is once you have a following, and especially when you have like a core following who comments on everything you post, you can kind of like turn to them as like a support and like have that conversation and just straight up tell them like, I'm really struggling. Like that's what I said in the video. It's like, I'm really struggling to talk about these issues because they seem really small compared to like some of the other things that are happening. And like, I got a lot of people who were saying like, no, like you are so important for continuing to tell your story in this time because otherwise the story might not be told, period. So I think one of the things is like using your followers for support. And then the other thing for me is like having people in my life who are totally offline, who are like, they're not friends with me because of my following. They're not friends. They don't mention my videos, like that whole part of my life, totally separate from my online life. And that's like really, really important for my mental health.
I think trying, like it's still the process, and my brain still has not wrapped its head. My brain is struggling to wrap its whatever. My brain is struggling to understand that this is my job, right? Because my job does not look like what my friends' jobs look like. I mean, they're consultants. I don't know what a consultant does. Like I know what your consulting does, but I'm like, she's in one of those consultings. I'm like, cool, you work for EY. You know, I have other friends that are doing, you know, in finance. And for a while, I felt like my job wasn't their job or not as meaningful as their job. Yet to them, we're having conversations. They're like, you're making a much bigger impact than I am. But I'm thinking to myself, I don't know how to make a deck. Like, I don't know how to I don't have the skills that you have. So I think the first thing that I have to take care of myself is stop comparing myself and also realize that this is something I have to consistently tell myself. This is my work. And just like I want to hear about my friends' work, they want to hear about my work. Just because you have cool gigs and you get to go around the world and you get PR packages, that doesn't mean that it isn't hard. That doesn't mean it doesn't, you know, take an impact and toll on you like all work does. So I think that in the same sense, it's important to share with your friends and with your trusted community, with whoever that is, the ups and downs of this to make it like a more humanizing experience. And then, yeah, therapy, that one, whatever type you can get, like, even if it's just sitting in the woods, that part too is, I think, really important in anybody's life, you know?
I mean, I'm still figuring it out too. I am lucky in the sense that I have two lovely baby kids. They're boys, 2 boys, and they ground me all the time because the second I turn off my phone, I'm just mom.
Yeah.
That's all I am to them, and that's all they need of me, and which is the world some days, but when it's just such a blessing to be able to just step away from that and be able to let my world be this big for them. And I don't always emotionally regulate very well because a lot of my content is very emotionally charged when I'm talking about literal fascism. Sometimes I'm talking about acts of genocide. So being able to just detach from that has been not always graceful. I am very blessed to live here in the Pacific Northwest, and I can just go out and be amongst the trees whenever I need to. They are in my backyard, and I am very, very privileged. But one day I'll be able to afford a native therapist. That's the goal.
I think it's also important to acknowledge, like, once you have an account, you do kind of end up in like a little creator ecosystem of people who are doing really similar things as you. And like those people, a lot of them I have never met in person. I mean, Birdie and I have been talking for a while. We got to meet here, which was really cool. But like, I'm online friends with a lot of creators, and they'll come to my rescue when they see my page being like taken over by people being insulting. They'll also be like, hey girl, you need to take a day off. Like we have like a lot of accountability and there's like a lot of support amongst the creators, which is really
Community
nice.
is really very supportive.
Well, we have, oh, there are more questions. Look at all these questions. I was going to say we have 15 minutes left with the food and things, but let's keep going if there's questions. What the heck? Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Katie. I came because I actually work at a nonprofit science journalism outlet. And so this might be a weirdly specific kind of question, but I was hoping you could talk about like when you have been approached by either organizations or outlets, what have been really positive experiences you've had with them? What have been really negative? Well, maybe I won't say negative ones. That might have been learning experiences for people that want to approach someone like you. And if you're willing, can you talk a little bit about rates and like what you think are actually like fair prices for what you're providing for your organization and your contracts?
Well, I can tell you a bad experience that I think will really just play this out well. Okay, when you do a contract, there are a couple of different options in the contract. Do they want it to house only on your platform? Are they asking for the rights to that creative work going forward? Are they asking to put ad dollars behind the post on your account? Or are they asking to reuse that video as a separate ad later on? And like all of those, I would charge different numbers for. The last one, taking my video and using it as a separate ad, is like nearly off the table for me. And the reason why is the comment moderation. So like I do not want somebody to take a video of me and pay to put it in front of a bunch of eyes who might not be very friendly to me, so that they can come track me down on my page and leave me a bunch of negative comments, which has happened to me with multiple campaigns that I've been a part of. So I typically will ask that the content is housed on my page, possibly with a collaborative post if it's on Instagram. And I typically ask to retain the creative rights for that video. Sometimes I'm willing to allow them to have the creative rights to the video, but then I ask for there to be a clause in the contract requiring comment moderation for 2 weeks after that is put up. And I want a readout on like, how did that go? Like, did you guys find a bunch of negative comments? Because I did a climate justice campaign where I've never received so many death threats before in my life. And it's just because they just put money behind the ad and then left it. And like the way the algorithm works is like the first couple of people that comment on the video, it's gonna go look for similar accounts because it says like, oh, this is engaging. So if those first 3 comments are like, die, climate change, beach, whatever, you know, then those are the accounts it's going to show it to. So that's kind of a long-winded, but like it's something I care very deeply about, is like protecting other creators from having something like that happen. Full pay transparency, it really, really depends on how many followers you have. And like, again, kind of anywhere on that spectrum, I charge anywhere between $1,000 and $3,000 for a single video. If you're asking me to ask my followers to do something, in addition to that, if there's a call to action, there's going to be an additional charge for that. I would imagine that these ladies probably charge more than that because they have a higher following than mine. But there's also, you can do something called an engagement calculator that'll like actually go see how many people on each account are actually interacting with your content. And you typically want that percentage rate to be around like 8 to 13%. So if you find an account that has like a ton of followers and put it in an engagement rate calculator and it has like a 0.1% engagement rate, they're probably paying for their followers. So that was a lot of technical jargon, but I hope it was helpful.
That was good.
Let's see, can we go for another question? Let's see, go ahead.
I'm a journalist at a newspaper right now, and I'm also really obsessed with solutions journalism. So that's a whole genre of journalism, just really focusing on reporting on the solutions to problems, not just the problems themselves. So I'm curious what you all have noticed in the reaction of your audience when you're talking about problems and you include solutions to them, or you include how people are trying to solve them, versus when you just talk about a problem and don't include any like actions or solutions or responses to that. Yeah, so I'm just curious, as you explore, in your content, what you notice about including solutions versus not, especially about tough topics.
For me personally, if I don't include the solution somewhere in my video, people ask what's wrong. So I have found that if I don't include some kind of actionable item, like, people won't engage. They want to know how to help. And that's the human element that I do my best to always remember every time I'm creating the content. Remember that people's human instinct is to want to help. And if you deny them that opportunity, then they're not going to come back. So
I would add a caveat to that, in that, at least in my content, I found that solution-only videos go nowhere, though.
You
have to frame the problem first, and you do have to make the problem seem pretty dire if you're going to present a solution. I've done like a bunch of A/B testing on this with my platform, because the work, like the issue that I'm working on, there are very clear solutions that we already know what we need to do. It's just like whether or not we'll actually do them. And so like I found that if I only post a video where I'm like, this is all we need to do to fix this problem, it goes nowhere. But if I post a video where I start off with like, we're careening towards catastrophe, but there is a solution, then it'll actually like perform fairly well online.
For me, I don't really feel like I'm a person that comes up with the solutions. I feel like my account is almost a like springboard for people who might have the solutions. So I oftentimes probe them with questions of like, what would you all do in this sense? And if I am going to offer my solution, it will most likely be like in a humorous way, because I don't think I'm the one who has the solutions. So that's how I feel about it. And oftentimes my followers are going to say what they think their solution is. But I will offer solutions to various questions of like, where can I find that print media? How would you go about media literacy? And I find that those do best if I post them in parts, because it's hard for people to hear a lot of solutions all at once. So that as well.
Okay, one more question. Yeah. Which one? Who are you pointing to?
Oh, there was a woman in the back in a leather or yeah, you.
I was wondering, so kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but with this new administration, things are looking a little different right now. And I'm wondering how you think, specifically like your platforms are going to impact it, whether or not, some communities are really going to rally around these messages and try and amplify them, or if you think that it's going to, like we're going to see just a larger crackdown and more sort of divisiveness within the media landscape, specifically in environmental, and like equity and justice work.
I did an interview with the Colorado Sun right before TikTok was banned for 12 hours. And one of the things that really scared me about the TikTok ban is like what I think we're going to see in the social media space is just a continued fracturing amongst platforms, where you'll have whole platforms that are just conservative content. And then you'll have whole platforms that are just progressive content. And there's literally no way for those ideas to interact with each other because they're being hosted on like totally different apps. I know it's kind of a scary future, but that is like, in my opinion, I think that's where we're headed towards. And in the meantime, like I'm gonna continue making my content, shouting into the void. I'm gonna do whatever I can, but like, maybe they'll be moderating me. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, it's going to get more, like we talked about, it's going to get more siloed. But I would also say that for me, I'm like really going to try to make the shift to center more curiosity and media literacy than anything. And also, I'm going to have to read more sources that I don't agree with and share that on my platform. But then my question will always be, will, as a Black woman, I even get shown on those platforms? Like, will that algorithm even want to feed me? And I don't want to be fed to the wolves either. Like, I'm so fragile. Like, I don't want them to be all rude and stuff. So we will see. So my question is, even if I go that route, will a face like mine be on the other siloed areas if it's not for hate?
I agree. What they said. Things are getting more and more, just echo chambery. We are seeing people go to specific platforms, and there's some doubling down on certain views. Like we're seeing kind of the purity tests on the left happening more and more often, which is really causing some issues, some infighting, and just I think we need to be more focused on being open to talking to more, hearing from more opinions, and finding what our common denominators are. Because as someone who has been pushed to conservative parts of TikTok and been put in front of people who literally wish me dead, I have listened to them long enough to hear that they have a lot of the same concerns. They've been fed a lot of propaganda and ideas on what non-binary indigenous people who advocate for climate look and sound like. They've and if I come to them screaming and throwing insults, then a lot of times I'm just reinforcing a lot of the things that they've been fed. But if I instead am the antithesis, a lot of times that they get caught off guard. If I can make them laugh, they're gonna listen.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of lessons that I learned early on in that wave of the oil workers, as I mentioned earlier, just understanding that these people are people and they have entire lives on the other side of these screens, that it's my goal to reach them. So I need to listen. And yeah, it's going to be more important than ever to reach other people. But unfortunately, the way the nature of algorithms is that they sort you into these little, what's your niche down and commit to your niche. But we kind of need to break out of those niches. So.
Well, with that, it's 7:00. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for your wisdom and candor and brilliance at what you do and expressing all of these things to us. It was a huge education. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting us. I always feel awkward having that too.
Right. Thanks, everybody. Drive safely, and you can mingle for a second.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm just not hot mic myself.
Yes, exactly. Turn the mic off.
Turn the mics
especially when you go to
off.
the bathroom.
I'm like, thirsty.
Right.